Hi, welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast, episode 30. Um, I'm Danny. I'm here with my buddy Randy.
Hey, Danny.
Hey, Randy. And today we're going to talk about how to live a good life. Um, so why did you come up? Because you suggested this. Why did you come up with this topic? Do you have any idea? Do you remember?
I know exactly why. Because
Oh,
I've been walking around and I'm seeing these people walking around with babies. And it sometimes it just seems like they're super smug and happy about that they've done everything perfectly. They're living the good life. They've got a big mortgage. They take, they have the cubicle job. They work the 50 weeks a year. And I was like, is that the good life? And then I look at these other people who are the living the lives they want to live, traveling the world, you know, not getting not staying in relationships and just being free. And I'm like, is that the life? And then I look at like old people and I'm like, I wonder what they would think.
I'm glad. I think it's like a really honest way though to ask the question, right? Of like, one, how do we live a good life, and what is it? And I think it's funny because our whole lives we're given via society, right, a sort of program of what a good life should look like. And you can imagine like it's like a list of check boxes, right, that you have to check. And if you check them all, you're doing well. And it's like, with time, like, oh, did you go to school? Did you do this? Did you have good friendships or relationships? Did you play sports? Did you blah, blah, blah? And then, like, did you go to college, get a good job, get married, reproduce, right? And like all these things that we use as a gauge for like whether or not we're living a good life from like a social perspective. But the problem with that is like I don't know that those are a good metric at all.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah,
um, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
it's kind of challenging because on one hand it seems like living the good life is doing challenging things, like accomplishing things. But the inherent problem with accomplishing things is that you work so hard towards something that once you get that actual thing you've been trying to accomplish, it can be such a gigantic letdown.
Yeah.
Like I think we spoke about this before, how our brain has a much larger capacity to want something than to actually enjoy something. And
Oh, yeah, we did talk about that, right? Which is applies perfectly here because it's like, we're always, I mean, but I think that's one of the issues, right? We're taught to always really have something, you know, in the future that we're working towards, always have this thing that we're working towards. And we're taught that, like, when we get that, we'll be happy, right? When we get that, our life will be good. When we finally get there in that place in the future. And I think the problem with that is that, and I think we mentioned this before, the idea that, like, you're still going to be the same you when you get there. And it's funny, we look at all these philosophers who focused on like the good life and you know thought about these questions about what is valuable, what's meaningful, what's worthwhile, what makes your life fulfilling. And you see it very often, that it really comes down to the in some way, shape, or form personal development, right, and growth. That's what matters. Is whether you call it character or whether it's flourishing or whether however you want to define it, whether it's ubermensch or authenticity, whatever word you use or concept you use to sort of capture the idea. It seems to be this notion that becoming a good person is what matters, not necessarily the stuff, those markers. Those are something society tells us to do because then we're contributing in the right way to society,
so
right?
becoming a good person. Oh, so then it opens up that whole other thing. Like okay, you know when you try and do the right thing or try and be a good person and bad things happen. Oh,
That thing that
you know,
people have wondered forever.
right.
Yeah, it's well, you get into a lot of like it's funny, you get into a lot of meta ethic questions, like, like, I mean, what is good, what is right, you know, essentially how do we understand what's valuable, right? Because this is the fundamental issue. We're asking like how do we live a good life? we're asking how do we evaluate whatever we're doing in the right way to have some sense or know that we're doing what's right, that we're gonna end up living a good life, or we're living a good life now. And I think part of the problem is a lot of times we think of it in terms of, when we think of it as a destination to reach, we're not thinking about the living of life now. We're kind of looking down the road at this thing as if we're going to get all of a sudden be happy or have a good life because we achieve something, and that never seems to work. So like living a good life, I think because we're alive, right? It has to be done now, or it has to be something we work on all the time, or that's a part of our lives, right? Something that we're always working on. The other things are, aspects or things that we do. They're important maybe, but I think like all those things you mentioned, like, looking at people with, and I've done that too, right? You look at people that have like, got married and have kids, and they at times seem happy, right? Not always. And it's like, you wonder like, well, I don't know, is that better than what I have, right? Because that's the problem. I think that's the difficult question. We always end up asking ourselves, like, we look at the other person and we say, well, is that better than what I'm doing or what I have? And is that our problem? Are we looking outside to try and evaluate our own life?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's while you were mentioning that, I was thinking that we're the only creature out there that really evaluates their life, anyways. So we're like the dolphins aren't swimming through the water wondering, "Am I living a good life?" And all these bugs on the ground and like, "Am I living a good life?" Nobody cares.
Yeah, it is funny too, because that whole idea that, like, we, we think of ourselves as superior and better off because we're self-aware and conscious. And it's not clear that that's the case at all. It really isn't. Like, I think about that all the time. Like, man, sometimes maybe the animals are better off, and the insects, because they don't have to think about it. They know what they're doing because it's sort of like, you know, in a way built into them. Some of them have a level of awareness, right? But it's not the kind that we have where it gets in the fucking way all the time,
Hmm.
and really impedes us from having a good life. And I guess, I don't know, what do you think? Like, I guess that's the important question, right? Is what is most important? Is it, is it something like, what is it? Like Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosophers, like the Stoics and stuff, the ancient Roman philosophers that argued that, really it was about developing, like becoming a good person. That's what mattered the most. Is that, is that what's necessary to live a good life? To live a fulfilling life? And even if it is, what does that amount to? All these questions are so difficult because I think even if you kind of answer one, you end up finding yourself with 15 others, right?
Hmm.
It's like, even if you say, okay, to have a good life or to live a good life is to, is X. Let's say we focus on character development, or we focus on, um, you know, doing great things like achieving a lot. It's like, okay, great, you've settled that problem, but you still haven't settled all the other problems. Like, is it only about the individual? Do you need to have community? Should you care about the community? You know,
Yeah.
should you focus on, objects and wealth and things like that? Or is that, problematic? Does that get in the way? I mean, yeah, it gets hard.
Yeah. So I guess from, and it's like something that I guess when dealing with change, and life is always dealing with change, it can be challenging to know for sure you're living the good life. Because like I'm very, very confident for a long time that I was living the good life. And then all of a sudden, just I think I have too much time on my hands, and I start wondering about it.
Isn't that funny? It's like, it is so true, man. As soon as you start to think about it, and like, you immediately destroy any quality of life you had
Hmm.
because you start to question it, right? And it's like, we do that, that whole idea of questioning ourselves, questioning our actions to make sure that we're on the right path, doing the right thing. It's like the second you start raising those questions, the second doubt appears on the scene, right? It's like,
Hmm.
and it is funny because I think a lot of times, like I was thinking about this the other day, after you had texted me a few days ago with the idea, and I was like, good life, huh? I've read so much philosophy on the good life, on ethics and stuff. And it's funny because, I always think back whenever I think of these kinds of questions, I always go back to like, that idea, like Socrates saying, like, the only thing I know is that I know nothing, right? That the more I've learned, it's like the less, you seem to have a clear idea, because either, like, it's very different for everyone in a certain sense, in the sense that, there's going to be, it's your own unique life, so it will be different, it will look different. um or that we just don't know, honestly, what it is. And I think there's some value in saying, like, look, it's about having, having values that you adhere to. It's about having, like, developing yourself, character, because in a way that makes sense to me, right? Like, we have this self-awareness, we have these skills, we have these abilities, we might as well use them, right? Because the only way I think it was it Marx who said something like, I mean, other people have too, but like, the only way we realize ourselves, and our abilities, our power, is in the world, right? You don't know what you can do until you do it.
Mhm.
I mean, you might have an idea that you could do it, but you're not sure unless you do it. And I think realizing ourselves in the world, at least in my view, I think is really important, because it does feel good, right? It feels good to see what we're capable of, to create, to do things. And I think that's definitely got to be part of it,
Yeah,
you know?
that makes sense because like they say that a tree best exemplifies itself by growing big and strong and
Yeah.
flexible and all these things. And so it would make sense that as a human, that would be the best thing that we could do, is to be the best potential human. So that leaves the question, is that the same for every person? Is that different for every person? I mean, it's got to be different for every person. But then you look at like monkeys or something, and you would say, oh no, for a gorilla, it's just to be, big and gigantic and muscular. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, I guess you could, right, right. So you could say for people, right? I think a lot of the, I think a lot of the valuable approaches in this area, and I would identify, like, there's a lot of really good ones, I mean, Stoicism and Existentialism, I would argue both are really good in this area. They give you a set of, I think they give you a set of tools that you can use and apply to your life, to motivate you to think, to start being more deliberate, right? To start focusing on, your own development, to focus on really thinking about, and asking questions about what values matter to you. And so, like, they give you a set of it's almost like they give you a set of tools to use. But I think for each individual, we will see slightly different application, because circumstances are different. There might be different factors in their life that make the application slightly varied, right? But it doesn't
Mhm.
mean the tools wouldn't necessarily be the same, I guess, if that makes sense.
Okay. So, what would step number one be for how to live a good life? Like, figure out what your personal ideal life would be,
Huh. I think that's important, but maybe
or
that jumping the gun, though.
would it be just be the best person that you can be in the moment?
I think starting with being the best person you can be, right, makes more sense. And again, this might be a difference in, how you conceive of a good life, I guess, or what it is. But I think being the best person, right, makes the most sense, because you're focused on that, because, we might formulate ideas of what we want, or what we hope to achieve, or what we hope our life to might look like, but they might ultimately not play out. Not because we didn't do our due diligence, right? Or we didn't put the work in, but because, other things happened, or other things got, external factors. Who the hell knows what could happen in the future that's out of my control, that might ultimately, right, upset me getting to that end. But if I can be a good person now, and I can start working on that, that's definitely beneficial, right? It's definitely better.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I find it interesting too, this whole, like, I always find discussions of the good life really fascinating, because on the one hand, there's a lot of disagreement, obviously, about what necessarily a good life, or what a good life looks like. But on the other side of it too, it's like everybody will reference, like, being a good person, or some sense of morality, or values. But then you look in the world, and they seem to be lacking entirely all the time, right? And it's pretty funny. It's like, are we lying? Are we hypocritical? Or is it just that it's hard? And for most people, it's too difficult to really, I mean, think about it. Like, I think most people forget that to really live in accordance with certain values is hard. That means you have to actually think all the time what you're doing and whether or not it's in agreement with the values you adopt. I mean, think of something simple like I don't know, like eating healthy, right? You know, okay, that sounds simple on the face of it. But if you that means you have to start like actually looking at what you're buying. You have to start understanding, what is necessary for you as an individual to take in each day, how much calories. I mean, really, it gets difficult, right? Over
Yeah,
time. And I
and
think that's
then
the thing.
and not only
Like,
that, but like dealing with the cravings, like when you drive past a Krispy Kreme and smell it, or McDonald's and smell it, or you just want to eat some junk food when you get those cravings, like you want chocolate, like dealing with that, because that's the most difficult times. Not like wearing, I mean, while you're doing your shopping, it's like, oh yeah, I'll only buy the good stuff, but then like 11 o'clock at night when you're like, I need some ice cream right now. that's that's when the shit hits the fan.
well, it does, right? Or like, I mean, or how many times, were you like driving somewhere and you tell yourself like, oh, I don't want to stop long, but I need something to eat. I'll just stop at the rest stop and get McDonald's, right? Like,
Hmm.
that's the easiest solution. And the funny thing is, it's like no matter where you are, that stuff is easy, right? It's made easily accessible. It tastes good. It's horrible for you. So it's like, all these things are like, I think, thrown at us all the time. So it's very difficult. And I think people do forget that. Like, we talk about like the good life, we talk about values and being a good person, like it's this kind of easy thing. I think we make it sound simple a lot of
Hmm.
times, but it's not. I mean, it's funny, look at all these philosophers that wrote about this, and like I think most of them wouldn't even have considered themselves like having reached the peak of their theory or whatever. So it just tells you like this is a lifelong thing, but to be a good person means you're just at least working on it, right? You're trying to be better.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Definitely does. Huh.
But I also think, to your point though too, about like the cravings and stuff like that too. I think we've talked about this before. I think it's also right, being holding yourself right to that development, holding yourself to those values and those standards that you have, but also like not dwelling on it so much that you derail yourself, right? Like, not, I think you said it before, like being gentle with yourself, right?
Mm.
Being willing to like, be honest with yourself about it when you make mistakes, but move on from it. Because what's important is moving forward, not living in the past, right? We don't want to live for something in the future that we hope to obtain, nor do we want to live in the past, right? Because both of those seem to be out of step with what's happening.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I guess just continuing to work on it. So living the good life, it's it's not like a set it and forget it type of thing. It's like something that you continually have to readjust for. Because
Oh,
I see,
absolutely.
like it's the thing is like when it came up to me, I don't remember the exact moment, but it was something like I was sitting watching this couple with their baby walking by, and they seemed like really happy, and I was just like, did I just completely miss the boat here? Like, did they? Because you think about it, and it's like, at least for an American, the American dream, have your two children, your white picket fence, go to a good university, find your get married, find your soulmate, and then live with them happily ever after. And I mean, nowadays there's a whole bunch of stress on like living your passion. You got to live your
Oh yeah,
passion.
yeah.
Yeah, which I think is a crock, but
You know what? It's funny too, dude, because I think it's like those cultural ideals, right? Of like what the good
Look,
life is.
you're just
Uh,
your little Freudian
oh,
slip there. Well, it wasn't a Freudian slip, but you're like, you meant to say cultural, but you said cult, and
oh,
you're
did
like
I?
those cult ideals, and it put it in perspective there because it's like they kind of are cult ideals because they are what this cult called America says is normal for living the good life.
Well, that's just it, right? It's like every every community has them. And I think that, but the crazy thing is, like, look at America, right? When you're young, you watch like all the kids' movies you watch, right? They all reinforce those ideas of like family, of meeting your soulmate, of this and that, right? And they make it seem like it's this like dream, right? That it's perfect, that it's amazing. But like when you grow up, you realize, like, first of all, relationships are difficult. They are. I mean, that's true. And I think it's, yeah, it's great to meet somebody that you can spend time with and want to be with. But even if you really find the right person, it's still going to be difficult at times. And on top of that, you have actual life to deal with, like student loan debt and all that crap, because you bought into that system and all of these other things. So it's like this weird, I think, like idealization of it to sell it, and then like at the same time, the reality of it's very hard. So it's very difficult, I think, to kind of, I don't know. But I
Hmm.
get what you're saying that too, because I think we all do this, right? We all look outside of ourselves and wonder, because that is the difficulty of being self-aware. It's that we can evaluate our actions, we can think counterfactually, we can think in terms of thought experiments, and we can wonder whether we're doing the right thing. And it sucks sometimes, right? Because I mean, like, there's the, as you said, right? It's a disease sometimes, an illness if you do it too much, because you'll literally do nothing. You will
Hmm.
get yourself to a point where you realize that there is no reason even to act, because there's too many reasons, and they're all equally good, right? I mean, like, that's like recognizing the absurdity of it. And then, like I said too, that's the other flip side of, like, I think, sitting there and wondering if other people are doing it right. Like I said, I really do think, like, the idea of a good person, whatever that means to you, values are important, but like at the same time, it's like we don't see them reflected in the world very often. Most of what we see is not the example. And I think that makes it hard too. Because, we look outside of ourselves and we're so used to, kind of assessing ourselves based on how other people are doing, making that comparison. And so it's like, if you want to be a good person, or you're worried about living a good life, but you're also surrounded by people who are worried about, like, you know, having the most, doing this and that, it's like it's going to be a lot harder for you, and it's going to seem, at certain times you might be like, why am I doing this?
Hmm.
When I could just do that and it seems so easy.
Yeah. Yeah, and also it's not reasonable to compare yourself to others because you don't know what the whole picture is with them. You make
Yeah.
it up. Like I made up this whole picture of this happy little family.
Yeah. And that's funny too, isn't it? That when you do make those kind of comparisons, you always like imagine theirs is perfect life. Like, oh,
Yeah.
they must be so happy just because like one of them happened to smile then, or something. Yeah.
Yeah, the
That's
mind
funny.
fills in all the blanks. I mean, for all you know, they could have like Crohn's disease and just spend the whole day in the toilet. So like you never know.
You really don't. It's funny though. I mean, it's funny though. It's funny because we all really do suffer from this, right? It is hard. It's hard to know whether we're doing the right thing.
Hmm.
It's hard to even know what a good life looks like for us.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes like the best we can do is just keep working on ourselves, and as long as we keep, my mindset is like, as long as we keep trying, as long, no matter what happened to us or how our past was, as long as moving forward we are trying to be better, we're trying to live in a way that's right for us, we're trying to live by values that matter to us. I think that is, at least at the very bare minimum, that's probably the right path, right? That's getting you in the right direction. And I think certainty is a difficult thing here. We're not going to be certain.
Hmm.
There's always going to, and I mean, I think, and that's what I was saying before, it's also hard because we are always going to second guess ourselves.
Right.
I mean, almost always. And maybe until we start to see, I don't know, maybe if we start to see, like, we start to see positive improvement, like when we were doing the, the small delights work, right? The
Hmm.
journaling, which I'm still doing. And, like, that's been so helpful.
Way to rub it in my face.
I know, right? I know you'll get back to it. But like we were really saying, right? That was so helpful. And so seeing the positive improvement from the practice, I think, is very helpful to get to help guide you on whether or not you're doing the right thing. But it's like, there's always setbacks and stuff. So it really makes it hard. And I don't know that, like, this is the other difficulty, right? Because I think most people in general want to define the good life as comfortable, easy, and pleasurable. And
Hmm.
I don't think that's the good life.
No.
And especially not when you look at like the sages and philosophers and all these individuals, that for them is not a good life. That is a wasted life, or, it's a life of really low agency, right? It's a life of low intentionality and stuff, and really low self-realization because you're focused on things, on the wrong things. So I think there's this misunderstanding where when we say we want to live a good life, people assume it's going to be easy, or it's going to be, I don't know, it's going to at some point get easy. And it's like, no, a good life will always be hard because those struggles are how we continually realize ourselves. Those things are how we continually show we're able to do it, and that we are the person we say we are, right?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. The that whole idea that the good life should be easy, and because I think that that one thought alone will kind of set you on the wrong path.
Oh yeah. Oh my God, like so bad, right? Because you get the wrong it's like, it's like how many people in America like probably like salivate when they think about like how much Bezos or whatever made during the pandemic, right? Like, oh, if I had, $90 billion, yeah, if anybody had $90 billion, you probably would never have to work again or do anything, right?
Hmm.
But the funny part is like he has like 200 billion and he's still doing stuff,
Hmm.
right? Like he hasn't stopped. And I think there is who I don't know anything about him, so I don't want to say anything about the individual. I don't know, but like, it's interesting because it's like even when you get all that stuff, it's like that's not going to necessarily solve any problems.
Hmm.
Money doesn't instantly impart value on your life, on what you're doing. It doesn't make it meaningful. It can make your life easier in the sense of reducing stresses, but we've talked about before, right? It's like at a certain point, like I don't know, it's interesting, right? Because then what do we do? What is the good life, right? I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what you mentioned earlier about how looking for a life of comfort and pleasure and everything kind of get you off track. That put it into perspective for me because before we started the podcast, I mentioned I've been having like a challenging month, and
Yeah, yeah,
but I guess that and before we spoke, before talking about this, I was looking at that in a bad light, thinking that it's bad that this month has been challenging. But in fact, it could actually be good that this month is challenging because that's helping to define me and refine me, and even though it's uncomfortable, it still is in the direction I want to be going and what I believe is the good life. So I just maybe have to stop overthinking it so much.
well, it's funny too. I think sometimes like situations like yours, or when those challenges occur, they're also good because like if it was easy, we would never really think about it. We wouldn't ask the questions, and they're important questions because by asking them, we're at least thinking about it, we're engaged in it, right? We're worried about our quality of life, and we're worried about it, you know, in a in an engaged way. And I think that's important in and of itself. I think a lot of people are not, that desire for comfort, for pleasure and stuff really does detach you from it. And you're not critically thinking about your life. You're not critically thinking about what you're doing, your agency. You're not living your own life in a significant way, right? So yeah, there'll be discomfort and it'll be difficult. And there'll be things that we can control and things that we can't. But I think, it does ultimately get us on the right path, to think about it, that it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult. But those challenges are also what make it worthwhile, right? It's getting through that. They make us better. They make our view. I think they give us a better perspective on things, on the situation, on events. We're able to look at the world differently and not get caught up, or not get, not lose ourselves because something happens, right? Not
Mhm.
completely go off rail or off track. Yeah, because it's funny. I think people like you get pleasure, comfort, like that kind of thing, and you also get the other side of that where people I envision a good life as like fame or likes, or like being an influencer or something, where like they have this sort of social status. But if that's your good life, the problem with that too, I think Aristotle said that a long time ago in ancient Greece, right? He said if you're worried about like honor, or you're worried about like fame, sort of something like that, you're putting the condition of your quality of life outside of yourself. So in other words, like you're making whether or not you live a good life dependent upon the people actually liking you or valuing you, which means that you're likely to do a bunch of stuff that you may not agree with or whatever, right? You might do all kinds of things to keep their approval rather than living a life that's your own because you're like focused on the outside. And I think that's a huge problem for a lot of people.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Huh. A lot to think about.
It does give you a lot to think about, doesn't it? You know, it's funny when you suggested this topic, I was like, huh, I wonder what we'll say. Because it's like, you know, you really I don't know that it's right. I mean, in a way, I think that, like I said before, I think there's you can get to a lot of good ideas, maybe a lot of good tools that you can use to help you get there. But ultimately, like, I don't know. I think it's up, each individual needs to put the work in, right? You ultimately have to do it. And I
Hmm.
think what's important is as long as we're thinking about it, as long as we're working on it, we're at least engaged in doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, if somebody came up to me and asked me seriously, like, how do I live a good life? Uh, I would say, one, the golden rule: do unto others as you want done unto you. Two, uh, work as hard as you can, and three, never give up. Those would be my answers.
I like those. Those are good though. You know, I
Mhm.
think it's good that you include the golden rule too, right? The idea that, you know, you're thinking of others, not just yourself in their treatment. So inequality and treating other people decently. Yeah, you
The
know, I
thing
think I
that's really
oh, go ahead.
important. I think
Okay.
that and giving or providing as much as possible is really important because at least that's how it's shown up in my life. It's like the more that I give, the more that I receive. Like, you know, we look at math as being an exact science, and at least in my life, it's always appeared like the universe is an exact science too. Like literally, the more you give, the more you receive. Like the more money you give away, the more comes back your way. And it's like almost whatever you're lacking in the world, whatever you feel you're lacking, if you start giving that away, then it'll start overflowing in abundance coming back to you.
I like that too, because it's like, you know, I think it is true. You know, we if we're so focused on just hoarding things for ourselves, we're not putting ourselves out there. We're not really we're not living in the world in an important sense, right? By putting stuff back into the world, you're also trying to help it get going, right? You're trying to help, you know, the human community and stuff move forward, and you're trying to realize things. And I think that that's a nice way to think about it, right? Where you will get more back than you put in, essentially. Like
And what
you'll
you just mentioned there with perspective, like trying to help humans move forward. How often, I mean, we were just talking this whole time about how we would make our own best life. We forget that we're just this tiny speck in the
yeah.
timeline of humanity, helping humanity move forward. So
I
that
I
answers
think
that one, and that having children is absolutely essential.
you know, I think that one's important though, right? Because like, well, I think it's also I think it's that one's interesting too because it's like, you know, there's so many problems in human society that we've created, no one else has, right? And it's like it's funny because, you know, whenever I teach classes on ethics and stuff, you know, the one main thing that always comes up is like, well, especially like if you're talking about like big social issues, right? Like or like the environment or something, it's like, well, how can one person make a difference? So people don't do anything, right? And it's like, well, that's just the problem. It's like,
Hmm.
you know, if none of us do anything because we have that mindset, nothing will change. It always has to start with the individual. So as long as you start, as long as you have that mindset, right, things will improve. You'll put things in the right on the right path or in the right direction. I like that. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I would add to that. You know, I really do think like some version of like authenticity is important. So I really do think you know, trying to realize yourself in the world in many different ways. So trying to, you know, both understand yourself, but also um sort of free yourself from the constraints that society sort of placed on you through like social conditioning and stuff, those ideas, trying to live your own way essentially and discovering it for yourself. I think it's fine, I think, if people arrive at beliefs that are similar with what society might suggest, as long as they arrive at it on their own. And it's not just like you're living through, the beliefs that were fed to you, right? And I
Mhm.
think that's important. I really think, agency is crucial, taking action, taking responsibility for ourselves. I think that's far too often we want to blame everything else. And, we're never going to get to a good life unless we take responsibility for our lives, right? And I think that's the other critical thing. And I would also add, I think relationships are really important, like actually having like good relationships, friendships, things like that, Um, but that's hard too, because that means finding the people that are right for you or right to interact with you, which is very difficult. I think everybody knows that. It's not easy to find people that you can be honest with or have a solid relationship with. Yeah. And at least that maybe we'll get people on a start
Yeah,
if
yeah,
we're living the
definitely.
life.
If they do have just a few things, that would be a good place to start.
Yeah.
And then stop thinking about it so darn much.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's the word. And stop comparing yourself to others because that's also terrible.
Yeah. That's a
Oh my
good
God.
list. A bunch of things to do and then a couple of things not to do. That usually that'll do it.
Yeah, a couple things to forget about, right?
Yep.
It's ridiculous. Did you want to add anything else?
No, I think that was a pretty good exploration of the topic, how to live a good life.
I
Yeah.
think it was. It was fun. I enjoyed it, and I think we brought up a lot of questions. I think the important thing with how to live a good life is, you have to ask questions, right? You have to ask questions, and you have to keep thinking about it so that you're at least engaged in the process of your own good life, right? Thinking about your own good life and what it means. Um, all right. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. We will be back this week with a quick fix, right? A short episode that's just some quick tips on a specific topic that we'll focus on. That'll be midweek. Please, if you're listening to this, please, subscribe, share, check us out on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel now where you can like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And subscribe and everything. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Please do all that, and we'll be back next week with a quick fix. And take care, Randy.
Later, Danny.